in this process of if there's conflict, if there is war, what is it that is being valued by those who are engaged in it? When Mr. Trump is famous for, threatening that he will go to war, right? Well, he has economic power, but we cannot, for the life of us, cannot understand why, even though he has the economic power, and that economic power is limited in U.S. society because there are certain rules that we have to follow. We cannot understand why it is that he doesn't really have social capital in a large sense. He has probably 40% of the people who value who he is. That's Mr. Trump. But he's still there. So if you think that all we need to do is to challenge the people who are up in power, his cabinet, who are all millionaires, billionaires, etc., I don't think we will be able to quote unquote depose, not depose, what's the word? We cannot win over Trump in an election. The reason why Trump won, one of the reasons why he won the election was that he was able to tap into what certain populations in the United States value, and it was not just about becoming wealthy. It had some other things, and the failure of the Democrats at that particular time, several years back, was they did not take that seriously. They did not take seriously that many in the United States who live in the rural areas believe, valued what it meant to be a rural person. And Trump understood that, and he went there. Whereas the Democrats didn't even bother to go to some of these places. So that's not the only reason, but so you see the dynamics there of that different kinds of capital are not always, or economic capital is not always which is why social capital is an interesting and important piece to think about in peace building. So I talked a little bit about transformation, and I have a very simple definition of transformation. It's the creation of a fundamentally new, which is also fundamentally better. So social capital needs to be always in the service of, in my view, in the service of this notion of transformation. There are four pieces of, in my view, of what transformation is constituted by. One is personal. The other is personal dimension, who I am, etc. The other is the historical, what it is that we do together as a large, the movements, the turning points in history. For example, the turn from print, from the script writing to the printing press is a historical transformative event, for example. There's the Fordist notion of assembly line. The artificial intelligence today are becoming historical events of transformation because it affects the big piece. So you have that. And then the political. The political is a very simple definition as well. Political is anything that you and I can do together. That's how so politics is not just government, it is how it is that you and I can, what we do together. So what is it that will hold us together is the question of relationship, is the question of, in that sense, social capital as well. And then there are, I just use this as a think piece, that there are different kinds of changes. There are adaptive changes and there are technical changes. So here's an example. So I'll go this quickly. Technical challenges or changes. Technical changes are easily defined. So I have knee problems, And so a technical change for this is to have either an ejection to kill the pain. That's very easily done. Or further down the road, knee replacement. So that's a technical change. But what is it? What is an adaptive change in relation to my knee? Adaptive change in that context is how it is that I understand who I am with my knee. Now I'm a dancer, I'm a ballroom dancer. With my wife and I, we do all kinds of dancing, right? Waltz, foxtrot, cha-cha-cha, when my knees were not a problem. So now, when I watch the professionals dance, because we dance fairly seriously, when I watch the dancing, I know in my head, I know how to do that. And you know, not just simple going like this, right? But things like you will lift, and I know how to do that. If you can believe it, we do that and turn her around and around my body and like that. Now. But now I cannot do it anymore. Now, a technical change to that would be I will have knee replacement, and they say that if you have knee replacement, you can go ahead. But an adaptive change there is to rethink, who am I now as no longer a dancer? That's more difficult. That requires how it is that one can quote-unquote adapt. And in the context of society, we need to have the capacity to determine what is a technical change and what is an adaptive change. That, using the example of the burial again, what would be the technical change there? It would be a very simple, well, you know, maybe we just need to find a way to pay somebody and put in the ground. But the challenges there, I suspect, had to do with culture, with family relations, with all of that. And if you wanted, in the end, to have a place where everybody could be buried wherever they felt they needed to be buried, then some kind of adaptive change needs to be understood and developed. That's more complicated. So I share this concept with you. So as you think about social capital and how you deal with it, to make sure that you also think about adaptive and technical change. I will stop there because it's almost 12, right? And let's spend I won't give any more. There was a professor, I was told yesterday that some of my professors were, during the lecture, they would close the door, nobody could go out, nobody could come in. That's actually a technical change. Adaptive change in that context would be to be able to convince you that it's important to sit and have an engaged conversation. Right? So, but since sometimes you need technical change, so I'll say, okay, shut the door. Nobody goes up. Let's have a few minutes of question and answer. I think I'll stop there. I won't say any more except to answer your questions. And then later on, no examinations, but if you can go back to think about those 3 questions as part of your conversation, that would be most satisfying to me. And I will share these with you. So let's spend maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
20 minutes is fine. 20 minutes is okay.
Oh, 20 minutes is okay.
I need to go to the toilet.
That's fine. You can. You don't even have to say it.
Just lock the door.
Probably no one will.
Okay. Yes.
When you explained the transformation, there are 4 parts, and I didn't get the part of sacred. Yeah. And the second one is the technical and adaptive challenge. How can we decide which one is work?
Let me use the example of, by sacred, I don't only mean what we're necessarily used to sometimes. This is not just about God. Sacred for me are those deep underlying structures that go beyond who we are historically. So, for example, in the Philippines, a long time ago, they had this People's Power Revolution. Right? The political side of that was that people got together in the streets and overturned and deposed Mr. Marcos. That's the political side of the transformation. The historical is that this was the first time in Philippine history that it moved society in such a way that it was the whole Philippines that was affected by it. So that's what happened there was this is the historical side of the transformation. We had to think about how is it that people got together in such magnitude? And we're still asking the question, but the question of historical transformation is tied to what happened here. It might be, you might think about it in your own context of history, when independence was declared and when it moved Indonesia from one part of its history to another. That would be the historical. The personal is how it is that individuals would change. Right? The sacred, what's interesting to me when I look at the Philippines is that even though personal change happened, even though historical change happened, even though political change happened, why is it that we are still somehow in the same kind of situation? I'm not suggesting that President Duterte is, or Mr. Duterte is like Marcos, but we still have an authoritarian, more or less an authoritarian structure in the Philippines, which is no different in many ways than the authoritarian regime of what Marcos called constitutional authoritarianism. My explanation for that is there are deep underlying values and structures that go beyond the historical, etc., that are tied to this authoritarian kind of understanding. That, to me, is the question of the sacred. So it is more than that. It's not just did God act in this context or not. The sacred for me has to do with those long historical values that transcend the particular context, but actually shape it. Same thing with if you look at the patriarchy. Why is it you may have women changing personally, historically, politically, but why is it that patriarchy seems to be still there? My answer to that is, rightly or wrongly, my answer to that is, as a metaphor anyway, is that, to put it in the Greek language, the gods of patriarchy have not yet died. So, the gods of authoritarianism have not, because we have not addressed that question. So when I look at the Indonesian context, because you are a multi-religious context, because you actually talk about the religious dimensions, and it's very clear the differences between Christianity, for example, and Islam, and also because of all the quote-unquote the hybridity that is in there, the liminality, etc. The things that are happening in between, the gods are there. This is how I use the language. In the Greek tradition, the games, the which now we know, but actually city-states in the Greek tradition, they would have these games. And people would come from all over the region and watch the games, and there would be a contest. And whoever won in whatever game it was declared actually a god. And then they had and so the philosophically, what I get from that is what you have is in that Greek tradition is that the people were witnessing the birth and the death of the gods. Because the one who was the victor before, maybe he still is the victor, so the god still lives on. And cannot explain historically or politically or philosophically why it is that there is such a person as Hercules, for example, right? The attraction there, the charisma, what is this there? You might have sociological explanations, but there's something more in my view. It's always that something more that I'm asking and I name as the sacred. In the Christian tradition, it would be the notion of transcendence. Transcendence simply being that which is always beyond me. And transcendence for me is very important because transcendence is that which allows the space to open. Because if there's no transcendence, then it's closed. Right? It's like the future. If you believe in the future, future is open. It allows us to open the horizon so that then something can happen. But we need to understand what the dynamics of that quote-unquote future is. And that can, in my view, cannot simply be explained by sociology, by religions. It has something to do with this notion of the sacred, which is always for me more than that which is more than what it is. That's that. I mean, it's not a satisfying answer. It's very ambiguous, I know, but try it. Try to open the spaces and not just ask the question, for example, in analysis, what kind of God is this here? What is it that is in this? And that might be, and in the Christian tradition, happily, there is this notion of a God beyond God, right? So when people, for me, the saving grace in Christianity, and I do this, I say this because I am a Christian, the saving grace of Christianity for me is that it has, even in its very understanding of the divine life, there's always this something beyond that we cannot name. And yet,